He was just a 70-year-old veteran in a wheelchair, sitting under a magnolia tree. No crime, no threat. But 6 white officers still surrounded him, mocked him, crushed his cap, and left him humiliated in broad daylight. What they didn't know was that someone was watching, and one trembling hand holding a phone would change everything. This isn't just a story, it's a reckoning. Stay with us. Dear viewer, what you are about to witness is not just a story. It is a powerful testament to the quiet power and pursuit of justice in places most people ignore. If this is your first time here, I warmly invite you to share where you are watching in the comments below. And if stories like this move you, challenge you, or make you think, consider subscribing and clicking the bell icon. We share voices that deserve to be heard every day. Thank you for being here. Now let's get into the story. The morning air in Charleston was sweet with the scent of magnolia and moss, the kind of air that whispered of old stories and quiet pride. Walter Green, 70 years old, rolled his wheelchair down the path of Magnolia Park, as he had done every morning for the past decade. Dressed in a neatly pressed tan vest, with his faded Navy veteran cap perched gently on his head, Walter was not in a rush. He never was. He'd long ago learned that the world moves fast enough without him needing to chase it. He moved to his own rhythm, now a soft jazz tempo of quiet dignity, memory, and grace. It was 8:04 a.m. The sun filtered through the trees like stained glass light through an old church window. The park was nearly empty except for a few joggers and the sound of pigeons fluttering near the fountain. Walter paused near the bench beneath the magnolia tree. He closed his eyes, tilted his face toward the sky. The warmth reminded him of his mother's hands when she used to bless him on the front porch before school. But then the world shifted. 3 police cruisers rolled up quietly, too quietly. The slam of car doors was the only warning. Within seconds, 6 officers surrounded him, all white, all young. Their uniforms neat, their faces unreadable. Walter opened his eyes slowly, confused. He hadn't seen a siren, hadn't heard a warning, hadn't called for help. "What's your business here?" one of them barked. Walter blinked. "Just enjoying the morning. This is my daily walk." "Well, roll." He chuckled, a gentle attempt to ease the tension. But it didn't land. "You got ID on you?" another asked. Walter reached calmly into the side pouch of his chair and handed over his wallet. The officer didn't even glance at it. Instead, he tossed it to another cop, who opened it and scoffed. Walter Green. 70 years old. He read aloud like it was a punchline. "What are you doing all the way out here by yourself?" "Mr. Green, causing trouble." Walter's heart beat faster, but his voice stayed level. "This is my neighborhood. I've lived here longer than you've been alive." The tallest officer leaned in, his voice low. "Yeah. Well, looks like Trouble's got a new wheelchair." They laughed. It was the laughter that cut deeper than anything. Not the suspicion, not even the way they stood between him and every exit, but the laughter. That bitter sound that told him they didn't see a man. They saw an old body in a chair, a brown skin in the wrong place, an easy target. Walter didn't argue. He'd survived worse. He knew what silence could protect. But when one officer snatched his veteran's hat from his head, examined it, then crushed it under his boot, Walter flinched. He whispered, "That was my father's. He served in Korea." The officer smiled thinly. "Guess you're not the only one who lost something." Walter's hands gripped the arms of his chair. His vision blurred with rising tears he refused to let fall. He wouldn't give them that. He would not. Another officer pulled out a phone and began recording, not to document misconduct, but to mock him. He made jokes about scouting old men for bingo gang turf. They cackled again. The sound echoed off the trees like slaps. A jogger ran by, slowed, stared, then picked up pace again, pretending not to see. A mother with a stroller froze. Her baby started to cry. She pulled the canopy down and walked a wide circle around the scene. And then from a corner near the food cart, a boy no older than 17 stood still. His name was Malik Dawson. His hands trembled as he raised his phone. He didn't know what to do, but he knew this wasn't right. Walter sat, surrounded, dishonored, dehumanized beneath the flag he once saluted. Eventually, the officers backed off. No arrest, no citation, no apology. They left as quickly as they'd come. But before they did, one leaned in close and said, "Next time, don't give us a reason to stop. Stay in your lane, old man." And just like that, they vanished into the quiet morning. Walter remained, still, frozen, empty, his crushed cap in his lap, his knuckles white on the armrests of his chair, his breath shallow, but not broken. Because even as his pride had been bruised, something else stirred. He heard the whisper of jazz in the back of his mind, a tune his mother used to hum. He remembered the sound of applause at his final school recital before retirement. He remembered the first time he saw the ocean after returning from war. And for a brief shining second, he remembered who he was. Walter Green, Navy veteran father, of 3 teacher to hundreds, neighbor to all. The man they tried to erase. But what they didn't know was this someone saw, someone filmed, and someone cared. The video would be uploaded that night. It would start as a flicker, then blaze across the internet like dry grass beneath lightning. People would recognize the park. They would recognize the uniform. They would recognize that look, the one too many had seen before, but were too afraid to confront. And Walter, once invisible, would become impossible to ignore. What began with laughter would end in reckoning. And the world would finally ask, who do we protect? And who do we allow to be humiliated just because we can? But that was still to come. For now the old man sat beneath the magnolia tree, the morning sun warm on his skin, and dignity rising again, like a tide that refused to be held back. Not this time. Not ever again. Malik Dawson hadn't meant to be a witness. That morning, he was simply out to restock the snack cart his uncle let him run near the park entrance. He was 17, lanky, and soft-spoken, with a sharp mind that rarely found space in the loud world he lived in. Malik was the kind of kid most people forgot about quiet, in class, polite to a fault, invisible in the eyes of authority. But his grandmother always said, just because you're quiet doesn't mean you're weak. Silence is where truth learns to breathe. That morning, as he unboxed bottles of lemonade and lined them neatly beside the chips, he saw something from the corner of his eye that made his chest seize. A group of officers had surrounded someone near the old magnolia tree. He knew the man. Everyone in the neighborhood did. Mr. Walter Green. The man in the wheelchair with the jazz in his heart. The one who gave away hard candies to kids who passed by, and always said good morning whether you answered or not. Malik saw one of the officers knock the veteran's cap to the ground, then step on it. Time slowed. His throat went dry. The rational voice in his head told him to stay low, to keep quiet, to do what every other person had done, look away, pretend it wasn't happening. He was just a teenager. What could he possibly do? But something deeper rose up in him, a kind of knowing, The kind passed down through stories told at the dinner table when adults thought you weren't listening. The kind etched in the eyes of every black elder who had ever walked this country with a spine of steel and a heart worn raw. He pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He didn't say anything, didn't dare breathe too loud. He simply hit record. He caught everything: the mocking voices, the laughter, the silent faces of the onlookers who chose safety over truth. He saw Mr. Green clutch his chair like it was the only solid thing left in the world. Malik kept filming until the officers walked away, until the air felt breathable again, until the world stopped spinning. Then he stopped the video and stood there frozen. What now? Back home he paced for hours. His mother was already at her second shift. His little sister was playing on the floor, too young to understand what he had seen. Malik didn't eat lunch, didn't turn on the TV. He watched the video again and again, his stomach twisting tighter each time. That night, he sent it to his cousin Jaden, who was studying journalism at Howard University. The reply came within minutes. "This is serious, Malik. This is really serious. You need to talk to someone." The next day, Malik walked to Walter Green's home. It took him nearly an hour to build up the courage to knock. When the door creaked open, Mr. Green sat in the same wheelchair, his face lined with fatigue. But his eyes still held something fierce, something that hadn't been erased. "I filmed it," Malik said, holding up his phone with both hands as if offering a fragile truth. Walter didn't say a word. He just nodded once slowly. "Come in." Inside the small home filled with vinyl records, faded photographs, and the scent of lemon balm tea, Malik played the video. Walter sat still. The screen showed him being ridiculed, violated, treated like nothing. And yet, here it was proof. Unarguable. Immortalized. He didn't speak for a long while. Finally, he reached out, rested a hand gently on Malik's shoulder. "You did something most grown men won't," he said, voice low, but firm. "You didn't look away." That evening, Malik posted the video anonymously. He didn't want attention, didn't want fame. He just wanted the world to see what it so often refused to see. He wrote only 10 words beneath the post. "His name is Walter Green. This is what happened." Within hours it spread. By morning it had passed 100,000 views. Hashtags began to appear. Sign, "Justice for Walter." Magnolia Park. "We see you." Local news picked it up. Civil rights organizations shared it. Then came the journalists, the interviews, the people from Atlanta and New York and even overseas asking for statements. But Malik kept quiet. He let the video speak for itself. He watched the world wrestle with the truth. He watched people, some for the first time, see an old man, not as a stereotype, not as a case number, but as someone real. Someone wronged. Someone who had once served his country and now sat broken under the weight of its apathy. One post caught Malik's eye. A comment from a woman named Ava Lane, a retired teacher I used to walk past Mr. Green every Sunday after church. "I never spoke to him. I regret that now. He always smiled, and I thought that was enough. I see him now." That night, Malik returned to Walter's house. This time, he wasn't nervous. He carried something with him, a photo he'd taken of the moment the officers walked away, leaving Walter sitting alone. He had printed it, framed it, and written in black marker, at the bottom, "I didn't look away." Walter smiled for the first time in days. "You changed the story," he said. "Maybe just a chapter, but that's how the whole book starts to shift." They sat in the living room for hours, talking about music, about the war, about what it means to stay when running feels safer. Malik listened, absorbed every word like scripture. He left that night with more than a story. He left with purpose. Because what Walter didn't know, and what the officers could never predict, was that one boy, with a phone and a conscience, would start something far greater than justice. He would start a movement. And the boy, who didn't look away, he made the whole world open its eyes. Walter Green's home was not just a house. It was a memory, frozen in wood and brick, wrapped in jasmine vines and the echo of old jazz melodies. Nestled in the heart of Birmingham, just blocks from the Civil Rights District, it had stood through protests, storms, and now a new storm of injustice. To the city, it was a house on a quiet street. To Walter, it was legacy, a patch of earth his wife once said would outlive them both. And carved into the foundation, invisible to the world, was something sacred: his name. That name, Green, had always meant something. Even if the world refused to say it right or see it whole. Even if the mail was addressed to W. Green or occupant, or sometimes simply left blank. Walter's name was there in full on the deed. He had fought to buy that home, fought harder to keep it during lean years, and paid it off one quiet morning with hands trembling as he signed the final check. But now that name was carrying a new weight. After Malik's video surfaced, the city tried to bury it with statements. Pending investigation. Respect our process. No comment at this time. The mayor's office issued a brief memo. The police chief promised a review. But Walter knew the rhythm of delay. He'd seen it before. Justice in America wasn't blind. It was just conveniently nearsighted when it came to men like him. Then came the letter. A notice, formal and cold, stating that the property at 224 Ashland Avenue, his home, was flagged for nuisance review. Someone had filed a claim citing increased neighborhood unrest. No name, no neighbor, just the word of an anonymous source and a bureaucratic signature. It was legalists meant to intimidate. And for a moment, it worked. Walter sat in his chair, hands stiff on the folded letter, the pressure behind his eyes rising like a silent tide. "They want you gone," said Malik, reading the notice aloud. "They're trying to erase more than your story." But Walter's voice was clear, steady. "They're coming for my name." And that name wasn't just ink on a page. It was a promise. It was 48 years of marriage, 37 years of property taxes, and the slow rebuilding of a man who had lost friends in the war and nearly lost himself after it. That home had held him in grief, in joy, in protest, and in prayer. It was the house where his wife Georgia passed, and where her garden still bloomed every spring with marigolds and lavender. It was the last thing he still owned that hadn't been taken or violated. And now they were circling it, hiding behind legal frameworks and procedural smokescreens. But Malik wasn't the only one watching. One night, as Walter sat by his record player, letting Coltrane play long into the dark, a knock came at the door. It was Ava Lane, the retired teacher, who had written the comment online. She wasn't alone. With her were 3 neighbors, all holding clipboards. "We've started a petition," Ava said, without fanfare. "You're not fighting this alone." Walter didn't speak, just nodded and let them inside. By the end of the week, over 2,000 signatures had been collected. Not just from Birmingham, but from New Orleans, Detroit, Oakland, and even as far as Canada. People wrote letters, some handwritten, some typed in shaky English, all saying the same thing: "We see you. We know what this is, and we will not look away." Walter held one letter close. It came from a woman in Jackson, Mississippi. "My grandfather was put out of his home in 1964. for trying to register black voters. He died believing his name didn't matter. Yours does. Hold the line. That phrase, hold the line, became a rallying cry. Civil rights attorneys offered pro bono help. Journalists dug into the city's so-called nuisance property claims and uncovered a pattern predominantly filed against elderly black homeowners with high-value land. It wasn't random. It was a quiet tactic, a systemic whisper meant to displace without drawing headlines. But now there were headlines, and then came a moment that no one expected. At a town hall forum, packed with cameras and concerned citizens, Malik stepped to the microphone. He didn't speak with rehearsed fire or political polish. He spoke like a boy who had been changed. "I'm not here to talk about a video," he said. "I'm here to talk about a name. Walter Green is more than a victim. He's my neighbor. He's a veteran. He owns his home. And this city is trying to make him disappear. You can't do that. Not anymore." The room went silent. Then slowly applause began. Walter watched the clip on TV later that night. Tears welled in his eyes, not from pity, but from recognition. He saw the reflection of every man who had ever dared to live free in a country that said his existence needed permission. He saw Georgia smiling. He saw Malik growing into something steady and strong. And most of all, he saw the deed still tucked in the drawer beneath the old family Bible. That paper wasn't just legal proof. It was a line drawn in the earth. Walter Green would not be moved. He would not be erased. And as long as that house stood, so would his name. The courtroom air was heavy thick with the unspoken truth that had long hovered over cities like Birmingham. Justice, when delayed, often arrived, blind not in its symbolism, but in its selective sight. And Walter Green, seated in his wheelchair near the front row, was no longer just a man fighting to be seen. He had become the lens through which the country viewed itself. Outside the courthouse, the air bristled with anticipation. Protesters lined the streets not in anger, but in solidarity. "Justice for Walter" signs swayed beneath the morning sun, echoing chants born not of noise but of determination. College students, elders, veterans, working mothers, all gathered because one act of disrespect had torn the veil off a truth too long tolerated. Inside the trial was beginning. At the center of it all stood Officer Craig Denton, flanked by his union attorney and a cold wall of silence. His badge, glinting in the courtroom lights, bore the number 4261. To the city, it was just another badge. But to Walter, it was the face of every humiliation he'd endured that morning in Marston Park, the one where he had sat peacefully reading Braille scripture before being surrounded by officers who questioned his right to exist in public space. They hadn't seen a citizen. They hadn't seen a veteran. They hadn't even seen a human being. They saw threat wrapped in skin. And Denton, by all accounts, hadn't even known Walter's name until after the footage aired. Now the footage played again, projected above the judge's bench. The gasps in the courtroom weren't dramatic. They were tired, familiar. The image of Denton looming over a 70-year-old man in a wheelchair, yanking the Bible from his lap, then pushing the chair backward while calling for backup, was burned into the public's memory. But this time, it was being examined as evidence. "Do you recall Mr. Green threatening you in any way?" the prosecutor asked. Denton shifted. He was uncooperative. Uncooperative. He was reading. He didn't respond when I asked what he was doing there. "He's legally blind," the prosecutor replied. "He likely didn't even know you were addressing him from behind." The silence that followed was suffocating. In the gallery, Malik sat forward, fists tight. He remembered the way Walter's voice cracked when he recounted how the officers laughed as they questioned whether he belonged in a neighborhood like this. That wasn't policing. That was profiling. Ava Lane took the stand next. Her voice, once reserved for classrooms and poetry readings, now carried a righteous clarity. They weren't afraid of him, she said. They were dismissive, cruel. I know what it looks like when someone exercises authority with empathy. That was not it. The defense tried to twist her words. Couldn't it have been a misunderstanding? She didn't flinch. No. Misunderstandings don't snap Bibles in half. Every word added weight. But it wasn't until Malik testified that the courtroom changed. He stood awkwardly at first. I'm just a kid with a phone, he said. I didn't know what to do, but I knew what I saw. And what I saw was a man treated like he didn't matter. His voice cracked not from fear, but from fury, long held in check. I saw a badge that didn't recognize the life in front of it. The judge didn't bang a gavel. She just stared long and hard at the defendant. Denton's lawyer tried to pivot. Officer Denton acted within policy. But policy, as it turned out, was exactly the problem. Because when it came to officers like Denton, the badge too often came with blinders. Not just to race, but to humanity. Training protocols, city ordinances, reasonable suspicion, these were the scaffolds used to justify harm. And Walter, with all his dignity, had simply been the latest brick in a wall built long ago. Back in his home, after the court adjourned for the day, Walter sat in silence, not the silence of defeat, but the kind that settles before a storm clears. The trial was still underway, the outcome uncertain, but for the first time in years, people were listening. Not just hearing, but listening. He reached toward the table and picked up a letter that had arrived earlier that week. It was from a retired police officer in Ohio. The man's handwriting was rough, but his words were clear. I wore the badge for 30 years, and what I saw in that video broke my heart. A badge should protect, not humiliate. I'm sorry we failed you. Walter read it twice. Then he whispered, maybe the badge can still mean something. Later that night, the city council announced an emergency review of their public safety engagement protocols. A fancy phrase, perhaps. But change had to start somewhere. Walter knew it wouldn't undo what had happened. But if the system could blink just once, then maybe it could begin to see. In the days that followed, Malik helped organize a panel of community voices, former officers, lawyers, civil rights advocates, and citizens like Ava, who had seen injustice and named it. They didn't want revenge. They wanted reform. Walter wasn't always present, but his spirit was everywhere in every testimony, every pause, every breath. The badge, it turned out, had no eyes, but now it had a mirror, and it could no longer look away. Because Walter Green, once just a man on a bench, had become the face of what the badge should protect, and a reminder of what happens when it doesn't. The sun had begun its gentle descent behind the rooftops of Birmingham, casting a warm amber hue across the small square in the heart of the city. There, beneath the oldest magnolia tree in Marston Park, a tree whose gnarled roots had quietly outlived generations, sat a newly installed wooden bench. Simple, unadorned, and yet deeply meaningful. Etched onto a small bronze plaque affixed to its backrest were the words, "For Walter Green. May we always choose to see." Walter himself sat just beside the bench in his wheelchair, a light wool blanket draped across his knees. He was quiet, not out of frailty, but reverence. Around him, a small crowd had gathered people from the neighborhood city officials, former classmates of his son's strangers who had become allies. Reporters stayed respectfully distant, their cameras lowered. This wasn't a press event. It was a reckoning turned remembrance. Ava Lane stood to speak, her voice clear but full. This bench isn't just for Walter. It's for every person who's ever been asked, "What are you doing here?" simply because of the color of their skin. It's for every soul who's had to prove their right to peace, to space, to sit without suspicion. She turned toward Walter and smiled. And it's for the man who reminded us all what dignity looks like, even when no one's looking. Malik followed, more nervous, but no less sincere. He didn't bring notes. He just spoke from the place in him that had changed. "I used to think that courage looked like big speeches and loud fights," he said. "But now I know it can also look like sitting still, holding your ground, not raising your voice when you have every right to scream." Mr. Green didn't just endure that morning in the park. He taught us what it means to be unshaken. Walter didn't speak for a while. He just let the words fall around him like petals. Then slowly, with effort and pride, he wheeled himself forward and placed his hand on the bench. His fingers brushed over the bronze plaque tracing his own name. His voice was soft, but no one had trouble hearing him. "This isn't about a bench," he said. "It's about the world we're willing to sit in and the one we're willing to build." He paused, the weight of the moment evident in his breathing. "I didn't ask to become anyone's symbol. I just wanted to read my Bible in peace. But if what happened to me lit a spark, then let this be the flame we tend together. Let this bench be where children ask hard questions and parents give honest answers. Let it be where silence gets broken, where fear gets named, where change takes root." No one applauded. Not right away. The silence that followed was thick with emotion, the kind that doesn't beg for response, but commands reflection. A magnolia petal drifted down, landing quietly on the bench beside his hand. And then, almost in unison, people began to approach. One by one, they placed items at the foot of the bench. Flowers, letters, candles, folded notes that carried words like, "I saw," and "I'm sorry," and "thank you." A young boy, no older than 9, stepped forward with his mother and said softly, "Mr. Green, I want to be like you when I grow up." Walter smiled and held out his hand. "Then just keep looking," he said, "even when others don't." As dusk settled and the crowd thinned, the bench remained still strong, unbending. It would be there tomorrow and the day after. It would hold the weight of those who came to remember, to reckon, to rest. And beneath the magnolia tree, it would whisper the name Walter Green, not as a warning, but as a vow. To see, to care, to never walk past again. In the heart of Birmingham, beneath a quiet magnolia tree, the story of Walter Green was carved into memory, not through grand monuments or loud declarations, but through the quiet, unshakable dignity of a man who refused to be erased. Walter Green was never meant to become a headline. At 70 years old, he was simply a man seeking peace in a world that often made no room for it. Bound to a wheelchair, wrapped in the rhythm of his daily routines, Walter's life should have passed like a soft hymn, undisturbed, unnoticed, and unchallenged. But the morning they laughed was the morning everything changed. It started with a group of uniformed officers, men who saw not a veteran, not a neighbor, not a father, but a problem, a disturbance, a body in a space they believed he didn't belong. Their cruelty wasn't loud. It was quiet, insidious. Words turned to taunts, taunts to threats, until his wheelchair became a stage for humiliation. But what those officers didn't know was that they weren't alone. Across the square, a teenager named Malik stood behind a sandwich shop window. He wasn't an activist. He wasn't trying to be brave. He was just a boy with a phone and a gut feeling that what he was witnessing needed to be seen. And with one trembling thumb, he hit record. The video would go on to travel far beyond Birmingham. It pierced timelines, stirred conversations, and rattled people from apathy. But more importantly, it revealed a truth we often choose not to confront: that injustice rarely wears a mask. Sometimes it wears a badge. Sometimes it stands in broad daylight. And too often it is ignored. As the story spread, so did support. Ava Lane, a local store manager who almost looked away, stepped forward to speak. Community leaders found their voice. Lawyers lent their hands. And slowly, justice began to stir, not with sirens, but with solidarity. Through it all, Walter remained rooted. He didn't lash out. He didn't demand attention. He simply lived with quiet defiance. He reminded us that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like showing up again. Sometimes it sounds like the crack of a voice that refuses to break. Eventually, his name, once forgotten, once dismissed, was etched into the brass of a bench. Not as a victim, but as a witness. Not of violence, but of resilience. And here is where the lesson lives. Walter's story teaches us that silence is never neutral. Choosing to stay quiet when someone is suffering is not an act of peace. It is participation in their erasure. The world doesn't need more bystanders. It needs more people willing to see, to speak, and to stand up. It also teaches us that age, disability, and race are never reasons to be dismissed. They are reasons to listen more closely, to honor more deeply, to fight more fiercely for the dignity of all people, especially those society has too often pushed to the margins. So what can we take into our lives? We can look up, pay attention, notice the people who are made invisible, speak when it's uncomfortable, record when it matters, support those who are targeted not because it's popular, but because it's right. And above all, remember that small acts carry tremendous power. One video, one voice, one bench. Each became part of a movement that made history. If this story moved you, if it challenged you, or reminded you of what still needs to be done, then we invite you to be part of something bigger. Subscribe to our channel, share this video, and help us continue telling stories that matter. Your support gives voice to those who are too often silenced. It fuels the work of truth-telling. And it reminds every Walter Green out there, you are not invisible and you are not alone. Let's keep walking toward justice, one story, one voice, and one bench at a time. Thank you for watching.